May your words be spoken, O Lord, and your words only be heard. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Thank you.
This morning, I'd like to invite you into the arena of imagination. Come with me back to a little house church somewhere in Asia Minor. It's evening, almost 21 centuries ago. An old man named Peter sits in the midst of strangers and friends. They call themselves followers of the way. Peter has been on the circuit to similar communities for a long while now, and in the time of our story, he is resting with his friends before his last journey to Rome and to Nero's upside-down cross of crucifixion. This little community where Peter felt so at home considered him a sage, and they waited eagerly for his sporadic visits. Even though he sometimes rambled or had lapses in memory, whenever he was among them, Peter's faithful listeners urged him again and again to tell them the stories of the one with whom he had shared a time of life so long ago, the one whose name gave them all an identity and a purpose. On the particular evening to which I've brought you, the common meal has just been concluded. The gathered group of faithful fill their wine cups again and move in a semicircle around old Peter. On this occasion, he's been rather quiet through the communion meal and singing and prayers. Often these days, the old apostle seems to be withdrawing more and more into himself, seeking something or someone deep within. But the gentle brown eyes smile back now as his friends settle in. And when Dov, the youngest, asks for the story again of what happened on that sacred mountain, Peter smiles wryly to himself and he nods his head for a bit before beginning the tale of that amazing event. He told them first about what happened in Caesarea Philippi, because for Peter, that always remained intricately connected to the events on the mountaintop. He told them about his confession that Jesus was the Messiah, didn't know where that came from. Then he told them about his absolute of the idea that Jesus would suffer, and Jesus' anger at that, and Peter's enduring confusion about that day. I believed him later, though, after the mountaintop, when the veil lifted and all his glory was revealed. We saw him as God saw him. There on that holy mountain, he was shown to us, God's Holy One. And I too was transformed in the light of that glory. What if we could all see one another as God sees us? I was closer than ever before to understanding for just a little moment where my confession in that olive grove came from. I also saw that there on that mountaintop, his death was necessary, a necessary prelude to his real glory as God's Messiah. Sadly, I only saw that on the mountaintop, and I didn't remember it later in Jerusalem at Passover. Johanna, in whose house church this little group met, saw the puzzled emotions traversing Peter's features in the pause that followed, and gently she asked, "What else happened on that mountain, Peter?" And almost as if the telling of events was too much, old Peter began a rocking motion. With his eyes shut, he began to chant. He began to chant the story, for that was the only way he could tell it. Moses, Elijah, The cloud. Jesus, but not Jesus. All whiteness and no color. It was too bright even to look. Oh, and we were so afraid, Lord. Lord, it's well that we are here. If you wish, I'll make 3 booths, 3 tents. And then that terrible, sweet voice saying, "This is my Son, my beloved, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." Calming down a bit, Peter went on. Then his touch. My own rabbi's healing hand was upon my head, and his peace chased away all fear. My teacher, my friend, no longer God's holy and fearsome one. That's who stood before us, alone now. He helped us from the ground, and all he said was, "Tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." A long silence fell on the little group of listeners. The awe of the mountaintop had permeated the room because Peter's remembering had created the event again. And Dov thought to himself, it's so odd how the telling of these things makes it happen again, especially about this man Jesus. Someone stirred and the old apostle's reverie was interrupted. He looked around and the cloud of memory covering his features was replaced by recognition of responsibility to those now present before him. Peter, the storyteller, gave way to Peter, the teacher, and he began to use the story of the mountaintop to help these younger ones understand what he had failed to see so long ago, that Jesus is indeed the Christ, that his reign is not of this world, that the transfiguration of one human being on a mountaintop was the key to the meaning of all life and the transformation of all history. Why Moses and Elijah? Peter fired his first question to the little group. Why were they with Jesus? As faithful Jews, they all knew the answer to that. Moses represents the law, said one. Elijah stands for all the prophets, said another. Pleased with themselves, the group looked expectantly to Peter for approval. But he turned their self-satisfaction back to them with a question they couldn't answer. Why were they with Jesus? When no one could answer, the impetuous old fisherman leaned forward and staccatoed out an understanding of Jesus' purpose that would later be woven into the stories of his life. Jesus is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, and for us, he's greater than these. Moses and Elijah symbolize the old covenant that Yahweh made with our forebears. But Jesus is the sign and the source of a new relationship between God and God's people. In the new covenant, God gives his very self to us in the person of Jesus. We are his people, not by virtue of following a code, but by following a person who is no less than God. Do you understand this? The transfiguration on the mountain was when he briefly swung aside the veil and showed his truest self to us for the first time. And it wasn't just Jesus who was transformed on the mountain. It wasn't even James and John and me. It was the transfiguration of all history that began with that first covenant. Faith and identity came to us through Moses, but it was transformed through Jesus, who is the new covenant, and extends to you and to all who shall ever hear this story, if only you have faith to listen. Never forget the words of that terrible, sweet voice. This is my Son, my beloved. Listen to him. Slowly, Peter's gnarled hand groped to find his near empty cup of wine, and looking into it as if he could read the depths of time, he called their evening to a close. They united their hearts in silent meditation until the old apostle prayed an ancient psalm with new beginning. Proclaim the greatness of the Lord our God and worship him upon his holy hill. For the Lord our God is the Holy One.